Welcome back, and welcome back to Rob Raymond to the show. How you doing, Rob?
Mike, doing great. Glad, thanks for having me back on.
Yeah, I was as we were talking in the pre-show a little bit. Had you back on in 2019, and we were commenting on, wow, the world was a little bit different than it was or is today. But so, what's going on with you? What have you been up to over the last 6 years?
Cogent, I think since last you and I have met, is tripled in size. The best blessing behind all that is, we've probably had over 1,000 small business entrepreneurial clients during that period. We keep developing our footprint. We're working very diligently, East Coast to West Coast. We are going to be in Mountain Time Zone this year, and I think we're probably a year away from, maybe a year and a half away from being all the way coast to coast. So it's been an interesting ride with the 2020 right smack dab in the middle of that. But uh, as I think I made mention to you, adversity breeds opportunity, and although we had to rethink Cogent a little bit in 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24 have all been very robust for us, and we've had a lot of really amazing entrepreneurs we've had an opportunity to represent during that time.
Well, that's amazing, and I love hearing business growth, especially during times that can be challenging. Because I know your business was around before 2020, but a stat that I saw the other day is 52% of online businesses that were launched in 2020 are no longer here, which doesn't
Mhm.
surprise me, because as businesses that launch, the stats indicate that they won't be successful unless they're working with groups like yours that can kind of help navigate through things that no one could have seen, and every one of those years that you mentioned, from 2020 all the way up to 2025, it seems like each year, or if you love television, each season has been, oh wow, this is new. And it kind of feels like a drama series. Like, okay, what's gonna happen next? We're all kind of veterans at navigating all of this, but so to triple your growth, and obviously expand like you have, what were some of the things that I guess 2020 taught you, because I'm guessing that year was kind of all right, what do we need to do in order to continue operating? And then after things started to reopen again, it's like, okay, do we return to the way we're doing things? Or my hunch is you leverage some lessons learned from that first pandemic year, but then those lessons also gave you, I'm guessing, some insights and some opportunities that you may not have seen prior to the pandemic. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So, we're strategists by, what we do for a profession, right? And I'll go right back to the profit platform, and I don't care whether you're a $500,000 worth of gross up revenue or some of our clients are 100 million plus. We follow the principles that we developed 11 years ago. We've gotten better at it, and as you made mention of, there were a lot of lessons during 2020 where we had to rethink how we strategically went to market. A lot of ours was direct in the client's office, working face to face with them. We were using some online platforming. We're a robust user of Teams at this stage, all of the Microsoft 365 product suite. But, it's funny, we laughed. We had Teams in 2018, 2017, 2016, but 2020 made us realize how powerful the product could be used. We went almost 100% remote for a year. And when we came out of that event, called COVID, there were a lot of lessons that we learned, and we had to reimagine ourselves during that period of time. And we helped hundreds of other business owners reimagine themselves. That from a client representation standpoint, we focus on, as I made mention, the four pillars, which are business development, organizational engineering, process engineering or process mapping, operations. How do you do what you do efficiently? And then, as is in our name, we are a heavy Cogent Analytics, right? Strong and powerful as it relates to information management. So, developing KPIs with our clients. How do we drive efficiency through a business, all for the purpose of generating a better profitability, improving cash flow in a business, and then at the end of the day, improving equity value on behalf of our clients, right? This is the largest single asset most entrepreneurs or small business owners have is their business itself. And then how to develop that equity value and really think about succession from the day you open the door as opposed to this last in line event that most entrepreneurs treat it as. There was an evolution both for Cogent and our growth. We went in 2014, we had 6 people. Today, Mike, we have over 250. So, that's multiple departments, business development, analytics department. Our marketing team has grown probably 6, 8 fold. Our accounting team, same thing. So not only have we evolved as an organization, but I think the service offering that we're able to bring to the American entrepreneur has just gotten better and better over time. I'm definitely a driver A type personality. So, I think back when you and I first met, the team was less evolved than it is today. I'm proud to say that we have a really sound mission in representing small business owners, and the people that elect to make Cogent Analytics their home have definitely made that dream better year over year over year. So love to take credit for it. It definitely is not Rob Brayman all the time. It is the Cogent Analytics team, and I would say we probably have as much evolution to go through in the next 5 years as we did in the last 5 years. So sorry for the very long answer, Mike.
No, no, that paints a beautiful picture. And what I'll do, I'll make sure in the show notes that I'll have a link to that episode back in 2019 because I think and I'm going to go back and listen to it again, and because it's always good to hear. It's like, oh wow, I was actually doing that during my interviews. Oh great, but no, you gotta love yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Although I saw a video the other day of it was an online course. I think it was the first one I kind of put together, and oh wow, yeah, I'm gonna redo that one. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna have AI. I'm gonna have AI Mike do it. Yeah, I'll just do that. Probably be a little less robotic. It was like, geez, dude, flex a little bit, man. You don't have to be so tense. But when you're talking about when everybody was 100% remote, and you were learning you had to do things differently, and then you were
Yeah.
helping your clients do things differently. I imagine that there was, obviously, as you were learning how to do things differently, and we didn't necessarily have a playbook, you're guiding your customers, and in a kind of a unique sort of way, you're both kind of in the same boat. And that is an interesting dynamic for advisory firms because usually it's like, well, we've seen this, we've done this. Well, it was this pioneer day kind of situation where I'm guessing in some elements, you guys were developing the things for your clients as you were developing it for yourself. And that takes an element, from my observation, a lot of courage because all of a sudden you're kind of opening yourself up going, yeah, we're doing this with you. We haven't launched this before. Come work with us. It's like initially entrepreneurs are going, if I said that, I'd be dead. But it was such a bonkers period. But so many companies were doing that, and the fact that you were out there helping these entrepreneurs and navigating through, there's no playbook, but you kind of figure things out and you go, all right, this is going to work. But the fact that your business was also doing that at that time, again, speaks volumes on the courage you had to do it, but you still did it because I saw way too many companies kind of shrink within themselves, unfortunately,
A
and
lot of withering. Yeah.
yeah, and they're like, what do we do? Something. It's better to change when you're moving than to change when you're not, and you can adjust a lot easier when there's flow going. If you're at a dead stop, you're not, you're just gonna be spinning, and it speaks volumes to it. That's for sure.
I think, and now's an appropriate time to have this conversation because if you were to look at any of the big financial houses, there's a lot of discussion about supply chain. There's a lot of discussion about recession. There's a lot of discussion about, labor and impingements on human resources. Funny thing about business, and I almost hate to admit this, I've got so many gray hairs now, right? 35 years of playing the game of business. I think, every year I learn more lessons. So I don't want to feel like I've got all the answers. Um, we picked, today's show really talking about the evolution from 2020 to current. And I would say every single year we've had to reimagine Cogent Analytics organizationally because we've been on such an amazing growth curve. I think there's a high demand in the marketplace. Plus, we have diversified in so many different ways to make sure that as we, and I think you said it the best, we are evolving as a firm and growing with a lot of different service offerings and development. So although COVID specifically created this event where we had to adjust quickly, the principles of business didn't really change. When you think about going to market, developing good revenue, making sure you have the right hats on the right head, being efficient at what you do, and controlling costs and margin aggressively, the vehicle, how we were teaching our clients, that was a dramatic change. We definitely had to rethink how we were taking care of our clients. But, in the last 12 months, as you were telling that story, I would say that we've had to do that same behavior really, and you could compress that down to the last quarter and a lot of conversations that we're having with clients about, and I said it before, supply chain and tariffing and cost of goods, and trying to create, reshoring or domestic supply chains and being able to buy products here local. What's the impact of tariffing going to be? How do I price my goods and services without losing my customers? These are all strategic discussions that we're having on a very compressed timetable again, and there's no pandemic out there. It just so happens that when the world changes around you in business, the fastest thing to kill a business is when you get static, right? When you become stasis in your approach, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, I think is the definition of insanity. And we see a lot of entrepreneurs go through that, right? They'll get to different revenue thresholds, whether it's $3 million or $5 million in gross revenues, $10 million in gross revenues. But a lot of businesses get stuck through the failure to evolve, right? They don't take the time to think strategically about each of the steps of growth. And there's no greater impediment to a small business or an entrepreneurial endeavor than when you get stuck. And I'll leave that open for more questions on your part, but I think this is a great topic to talk about today.
Oh, most definitely. And it's very timely because, again, there's so many things, in flux. And depending on the business and, where they, if they sell products, where are they acquiring those products? How much inventory do you have? Because the inventory that you have now, when you start buying more of it, depending on where it's coming from, there's going to be an increase on how much you're paying. And that, of course, you have to pass this through. Anybody that understands anything about economics or just life in general and supply chain is a business, especially small business, can only absorb so much. Yeah, we
Right.
want to defer the pain from the customer, but as you said, if we lose money on every transaction, well, you're going to be one of those 52% pretty quickly. And the challenge then, of course, is, other organizations that are similar to you that are in business, where are they at in things? Because they may, have enough inventory where they can say, okay, we're going to sell these things, whatever they happen to be, widgets, and we're going to keep it at a cost where you are forced to raise your price. And of course, people are naturally going to gravitate to a lower or more affordable price in their mind just because that's kind of how we've conditioned ourselves and understanding, how things work. We saw it in grocery stores and we've seen it with the whole egg situation and all of that. It's like, what do you mean $13 for a dozen eggs?
A
It's like,
dozen eggs.
yeah, it's like, well, case in point, as if you remember, I split my time between San Diego and Toronto, and
Hmm.
last month, for the month of March, for the first time, U.S. Customs seized more eggs than fentanyl. That
Yep.
was, yeah, and it's like, but I understand it because people want eggs and they can cross the border, and either Canadians are eating bird flu eggs, or we didn't have the issue in Canada to the same extent that happened in the U.S. So supply and demand, it boils down to that. But the economic indicators and levers and things where so many organizations, leverage, kind of just-in-time inventory, or they don't keep a big stock of things, so it's a constant flow. When that flow is interrupted, whether it's a supply chain issue with freight or products aren't available or whatnot, it has such a huge immediate impact. I
It's
remember as a kid.
absolutely immediate. Yep.
Yeah, I remember as a kid, I'd be watching the news, and they would show, okay, Dow Jones was up this. This was even before Nasdaq. Dow Jones is up this. Futures of certain things, animal products
Pick
or
a
things like that.
commodity.
Yeah,
Yep.
commodity was this or this, and you're like, okay, well that mean, and they would say, okay, especially if there's a big spike, prepare to pay more for orange juice this fall. Well, we had this long runway before we have to worry about oranges and orange juice being more expensive. Well, now it's up, there's been, half the chicken population on the West Coast had to be eliminated because of bird flu. Egg prices are $13, tomorrow. It's because they're buying the eggs every day, and all of a sudden they go to buy the eggs, and their prices or whatever they're paying for, they can't, well, we're just going to absorb that because they don't know. We don't know. It's like, when's that going to come down? And so,
Business.
go ahead.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I
No, 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 go
apologize.
ahead. No, go ahead.
So business kind of depends on a certain level of certainty, right? It's the uncertainty, and it's interesting. We'll probably air this show 4 to 6 weeks into the future, depending on what your show schedule is. But today, we have been dealing with, the prospect of tariffing and a lot of unease in the market space. I think the market was off 6,000 points in the last 30 days. Here we sit on, and I don't know if you mind if I use the date, but here we sit on April 9th. And about 2 hours ago, our president announced a pause on tariffing for 90 days. So depending on when this show airs, just today there was a 2,700 point just before you and I jumped on of a pause on tariffs. And what that meant is for business owners, some type of relief, because yesterday when we woke up, we weren't sure whether we were going to be able to buy goods and services, whether it be Canada, Mexico, Europe, regardless of where your supply chain was going. You had a lot of impact to both the market, you had a lot of impact to entrepreneurs, you had a lot of impact to businesses big and small. And just the pause on tariffing for a 90-day period caused the market to jump 2,600 points in a period of hours. We woke up this morning and the market was going down on a 4-day slide or a 5-day slide. And just in a period of 2 hours with one announcement, you saw the business people and finance people respond in kind, because the one thing that business needs is a constant. So if I was going to tell your audience, talking about strategy, talking about where your business is going, how do you source product, how do you manage to a gross and a net margin efficiently, it becomes a more prescient conversation today than it might have even been 3 or 4 months ago. I think because there's been such a tumult in what people are going to expect out of business, or how do I make a profit in business. Again, entrepreneurs' number one asset, their whole livelihood, usually how they feed their families and how they take care of their employees and their families, is a derivative of how well a business can run and control those costs. So it's interesting. We just threw out eggs as an example, but not 5 days ago that the question mark was, was that everything I was buying to make my product? Was that everything that I was selling was going to be impacted by that pricing? Who, who or what? And I want to bring back again, you said, what does my competitive analysis look like? What are my competitors saying that same egg for? And if I go to grocery store A and it's 13 bucks a dozen, and I go to grocery store B and it's 12 bucks a dozen, and you have a lot of consumers that are going to shop for that best price. And when can I take that price increase? What's it going to mean to my bottom line? How much of those costs am I going to have to eat? So, depending on when you air this show, this is going to be a very real conversation. Because I think, for the clients that I'm talking to every day, and we've got hundreds and hundreds of active clients that we're working with on an ongoing basis, this is probably the most important conversation that we as an advisor group are having with our clients. And we're doing the finance, we're doing the numbers, we're actually working through with them the details of how to be prudent in an unknown environment. Because, like I'll say it again, business likes more stability than it likes the rational or irrational ebbs and flows of daily decision making process. And I don't care if you're talking to Apple or you're talking to mom and pop on Main Street. Mom and pop on Main Street definitely needs constants in their life because they're not sure what that economy is going to do next. So sorry for the very long answer to a shorter statement, but
No, it's important, and picking on eggs again for a minute, it's something that we don't, we hear about it in the news. Maybe I've missed it, but I'm sure there's been segments on it. It's like let's talk about the small mom and pop restaurants, the breakfast places. All
for
of a
sure.
sudden, their breakfast special, it was 5.99, not 5.99 now, and people are going, well, I can't afford to go there because I mean, and all of a sudden you start seeing smaller businesses struggle and go, okay, what do we need to do? Do we need to bump up our lunch menu? What, maybe we don't get a lunch menu. And I'll give a real life example. Family member works for government, not federal, but a local government,
Hmm.
and their offices are, have been in the same geographic area forever, as long as I remember. And, they are acquiring some property and going to be moving maybe a 10-minute drive away. Well, there's a local restaurant that, again, has been there as long as I can remember, and they get a gigantic lunch crowd from those county employees. Well,
That's right.
those county employees are going to be moving to the new building when that opens up in probably a year or two because there's some demo that needs to be done and whatnot. But the owner, my brother, went because he works there and he goes to the lunch place and the family's gone there forever. And the owner, said the second they move those employees, we're done. We're done. I'm closing up shop. We lose our lunch crowd. We're done.
It's a
Um,
very real example.
yeah, and it's I see that and you go, ugh. And that's the ripple effect of decisions that happen with organizations. If an organization, entrepreneurs builds up, things are good, and all of a sudden they decide, okay, I'm going to close up shop. What does that do? And we've seen it. I grew up in Pontiac, Michigan. When General Motors left, I saw what that did to that city. It killed it. Now, I'm not going to be pointing fingers or yelling or anything like that. That's just the reality of what happened. Now, there was all kinds of circumstances and decisions, business, all of those things, but the tangible impact of that was the devastation of a community because the largest employer, pardon the pun, that city put too many eggs in one basket, and
Right.
when that basket went away, they didn't have any eggs, and
Tier two suppliers, tier three
right.
suppliers, manufacturers. And most people don't think about the ripple effect from that, right? It could be the local hardware store
Mhm.
that doesn't have as many customers walking through their door. That's a very real circumstance that happens through that decision making process. Um, you know, it it's I have in the last 35 years referred to it as, the tombstone of the American small business, right? Because if you're in a fixed base and you have a local community, if you're not agile and you're not thinking about, if you're always thinking about all the good things and the good times are rolling and you're not aware of, the risk and threats that are both internal and external to your business, and you're not having an honest conversation with yourself at least once a year, although I advise people to do it once a quarter because usually business moves faster than once a year. I hate to say it in terms of a rainy day fund, but I have a lot of clients that when we meet them, they're operating at 5, 6, 7% profitability. And by the time you take care of your debt or the time you reinvest back in the business or you have to pay for, equipment replacement, there's usually not a lot left over for a mom and pop business owner because they're not thinking in terms of building up cash reserves or building up assets external to the business. So it's a very real thing when you think about generating a profit and generating positive cash flow. It's not just about what's happening 3 inches in front of you. It's typically what's happening 3 inches, 3 feet, 3 miles, that get people in trouble. So, I have a lot of clients, as I said, dealing with the right now of business. And the conversation almost always, Mike, goes back, okay, well, what were you doing in 22 and 23 in preparation for 24 and 25? And woefully, a lot of big businesses always think in that terms, right? They're thinking 1 year, 3 year, 5 year strategy, where most entrepreneurs think about tomorrow. And having those very honest conversations with people about, okay, what's going to happen for the balance of 25. And I started this show by saying adversity breeds opportunity. What is happening with our clients right now is they're asking, what I'll call wisdom questions. If you think about what happened in, '07 and '08 and '09 and 10, and then turn around and a couple of years forward, you run into COVID and what that did to our overarching economy. And right now, a lot of uncertainty. It definitely brings on, what I call better conversations in the entrepreneur land. So, and I'm happy to have them, right? To me, that's the conversations we should be having anyway. And the fact that we've built enough trust with our clients to be a resource for them, hopefully it helps with some of the uncertainty and at least allows people to have more strategic based conversations about what they're doing with their large asset called their company. And yeah, sorry for the long diatribe.
No, no, that's been very important, and I highly encourage entrepreneurs and business owners that listen to this show, and thank you for listening. I used to say, my mom doesn't even listen, but she's passed, so she's not listening anymore. My wife doesn't listen. She says, "I get the live version. I don't need to hear you recorded." But that's another story for another day. But no, I've always loved our conversations. Rob, where can people find out more about you and reach out to you to have these very important conversations about looking ahead and being adaptable and agile in these ever-changing times?
So we have a very robust website, cogentanalytics.com. And we've got white papers and case studies and material that we post. We've, published articles, podcasts that I'm doing with you. We try to give to the entrepreneurial community. So that's probably the best way. If, you want to send a personal email or an outreach, we're about to put up an entrepreneurial quiz to help the small business community, which really is an in-depth, how do I as an entrepreneur self-evaluate without Cogent, feeling like we're just a marketing tool. We actually put it out there and don't ask for any information. It should be launched in the next 30 days, but cogentanalytics.com is probably the best way. And if you want to talk to an advisor directly, reach out. There's people manning the lines every single day. So from that perspective, we're here to serve.
That's awesome. Love the work you're doing and continued success and growth. And thanks again for being on the show.
Mike, it's always a blast, and thanks for having me.